My name is Becky Thompson. I'm 39 years old. And this is the story of how my husband brought his mistress and secret child to end our marriage, only for my son's words to destroy everything he thought he'd built. It began on an April afternoon that felt oddly still. The kind of still that makes you suspicious, like the world knows something you don't. I was folding laundry, mundane, domestic, normal, when Richard, my husband of 15 years, called me on video. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 weeks. I thought maybe he missed us. That maybe the silence had been his way of working through something difficult and he was finally ready to come home. But the moment his face filled the screen, I knew. His expression wasn't tired, it was final. Becky, we should get divorced. 5 words. No anger. No explanation. Just a sentence that cracked through my chest like thunder on a clear day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared. The call ended before I could say a single word. I sat on the edge of the couch, holding my phone like it might turn back time. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived by express mail. Inside, divorce papers, highlighted financial terms, and a handwritten note in his lazy, slanted cursive. Becky, thank you for everything. I believe we both deserve a new life. Back home before fall, so please prepare to move. Move. From the house I kept standing, year after year? The house where our son Nathan took his first steps, lost his first tooth, made his science fair volcano? I called Richard that night. He answered on the 6th ring, voice low and detached. I don't want this to get messy, Becky. Oh, so handing me legal papers out of nowhere is your idea of polite? We've been apart too long. It's not a marriage anymore. That was your choice. You left. You always left. A pause. Then the real blow, this house, it's Thompson family property. It's under my father's name. You'll need to vacate by the end of summer. I stared out the window, the garden I'd tended for a decade blooming below. This house was mine in every way that mattered. I didn't even bother responding. I just whispered, noted. When Nathan came home that night, I made dinner like usual. Burgers, fries, a soda with lime, his favorite. I asked him about school. Pretended nothing was wrong. But inside, I was already changing. I had given Richard everything, my youth, my career, my energy. I raised our son. I took care of his parents. I had been invisible for so long that even I had forgotten what it meant to feel seen. That night, I pulled out a file folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the first chapters of a novel I'd started writing under the pen name C.L. Monroe. A story about a quiet woman with a secret strength. I had posted it online months earlier on a small writers' forum. To my shock, it had gained over 100,000 followers. I never told Richard. He would have scoffed. Called it a hobby. But this hobby had become my sanctuary. And now, maybe, my salvation. 3 days later, I called him back. I'm not signing. Becky, come on. You're making this harder than it has to be. No, I'm being a mother. If you want my signature, we renegotiate. Nathan gets full tuition support through college. You cover moving costs. And you'll contribute to attorney fees. That's not legal. But it's moral. If you refuse, I'll take this to court. He hung up. I smiled. I wasn't the same woman he used to control with silence and guilt. I was learning. Quietly, steadily, like a tide rising under the moon. I went through every document he sent. Not a word about the years I gave up work. No acknowledgement for what I'd sacrificed. And something else caught my eye, his business return address wasn't from Chicago like he claimed. It was from Peoria. I hired a private investigator, a retired woman named Linda who specialized in uncovering financial deceit during divorces. 3 days later, she sent me a picture. There he was. Richard. Standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, holding groceries, smiling beside a woman in her early 30s, blonde, petite, younger. Between them stood a little boy. Maybe 6. Holding a popsicle. Looking up at Richard like he was his entire world. Linda confirmed everything. The house was owned by Jenna Malone, a dental assistant. The boy, Liam, had no father listed on his birth certificate. Richard had rented a nearby apartment as a decoy. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was trading families. Preparing to insert his secret child into the life I had spent 15 years building. That was the day I stopped wondering why. And started planning how. I sent him an email with 2 photos and 1 sentence. If you want my signature, be prepared to pay for Nathan's college, my legal fees, and all relocation costs, or I'll present this in court. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. Becky, I can explain. No more lies, Richard. That boy is your son, isn't he? Silence. You will not throw me out. And you will not leave Nathan without a home. More silence. Then. We need to talk. I'll come this weekend. And that's when the real game began. Richard showed up that Sunday afternoon without calling first. I heard the crunch of his tires in the gravel, the same gravel I used to rake smooth every weekend so Nathan could play basketball without tripping. He stepped out of his car wearing a pressed white dress shirt, dark jeans, and that same smug calm he always wore when he thought he was in control. I didn't greet him at the door. I let him knock. Twice. Then I opened it without a smile. We need to talk, he said flatly, stepping in as if he still owned the place. He didn't. The house felt different now. The photos of his parents had been replaced with pictures Nathan had drawn, my pressed flower designs framed on the walls, and a large printout of my novel's fan art pinned on the fridge, anonymous, but proud. We stood in the living room for a long beat before I said, "You're rushing this divorce because your son needs to start school, right? Liam?" His eyes twitched. So he wasn't going to deny it anymore. Still, he said nothing. Just looked at the wedding photo on the shelf like it might forgive him. Becky, he sighed. I don't want to make this ugly. I just want to move on and be fair. Fair? I scoffed. You want fair? After 15 years of ghosting through our marriage, after blindsiding me with papers, and after hiding a second family 3 hours away, now you care about fairness? I'm not hiding anything, he muttered, reaching for a folder in his bag. Let's go over the numbers. I'll leave you with. I cut him off with a stack of documents I'd pulled from the side drawer. Legal paperwork. Deeds. Letters. He paused mid-motion. What's this? Truth, I said, cool and steady. Read. He flipped through the pages, his face slowly paling. Deed transfer from Harold Thompson, his father. A notarized letter confirming my adoption by Harold during his illness. And estate adjustment that left this house in my name. Adoption? Richard hissed, eyes wide. You didn't visit him for months after his second stroke. I took care of everything. Therapy, groceries, doctor appointments. He said I was more his child than you'd ever been. Richard slammed the papers on the table. This is a setup. No, I replied, unmoved. It's a correction. Harold saw through your absence. And when he found out you were cheating? He filed to have your inheritance revoked. His lawyer has confirmed everything. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no crack in the foundation. Not anymore. He collapsed into the armchair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His hand trembled slightly on the leather armrest. So what now? He finally asked, voice low. You're kicking me out? No, I said calmly, standing tall. I'm letting you walk out once you understand that this house is mine. Nathan stays. I stay. You go. He stared at the coffee table, eyes fixed on the documents like they were landmines. Then, slowly, he got up and walked to the door. I followed him. Wait, I said as his hand gripped the doorknob. One more thing. If you try to dodge child support, if you try to drag this through court, I'll bring every bit of evidence I have to the family court. And if needed, I'll go public. He froze. You wouldn't. Try me. I didn't say it with anger. I didn't need to. I said it with knowledge, the kind that burns slow but leaves nothing untouched. Richard left without another word. I watched him drive off through the kitchen window, then turned back to the documents spread across the table. The storm had passed. But the aftershocks were still to come. 3 weeks later, I received a contract in the mail. From Harper Literary. Subject line, adaptation rights for Ash Tree Letters, confirmed. I stood motionless for several minutes before opening the envelope. The 6-figure licensing deal. A Japanese-American animated adaptation. Global release scheduled for spring. I had written the story under a fake name, in secret, during the nights Richard was away, never imagining it would become a phenomenon. But now? Now it was real. I signed the contract with Nathan beside me. He wore his best shirt. Smiled with quiet pride. Said nothing when I cried after signing. That night, at a diner downtown, he looked up from his plate and asked, Mom, are you going to tell Dad? I sipped my coffee, thinking hard. Maybe. Maybe it's time. I didn't expect the opportunity to come just days later. Richard called for the first time since our showdown. His voice had changed, no longer sharp, just flat. Weak. Becky. I heard about Dad. Nathan told me. I didn't think it would go this far. You didn't think I'd protect my home? Silence. I know I messed up, he said, his voice cracking. But I also know, you're not just some woman who makes lunch and pays the bills. Nathan, he's proud of you. And now I know why. I let out a soft laugh. I'm C.L. Monroe, I said. What? You know the author of Ash Tree Letters? The one you asked Nathan about, called Ridiculous? Pause. Then, no. You're joking. Why? Because I was your wife, and in your eyes, just a housewife? I studied family law. I learned my rights. I built something that no one can take from me. Not even you. Silence on the line. I continued. If you're calling to fight for assets, forget it. If you're calling to come back, you're decades too late. I hung up. And for the first time, my hands didn't shake. A strange calm settled over the house in the weeks that followed. Nathan was doing well, better than I expected. He didn't ask about his father much, but I caught him reading Ash Tree Letters late at night with his lamp on, his lips moving as if silently mouthing the words. He didn't know every detail, but he knew enough. He had always been observant, more than his quiet demeanor let on. One morning, as we were walking through the grocery store picking out fresh basil and eggs, he looked up from his phone and said, Dad called me. I paused, holding a carton in my hand. What did he say? He asked if I thought you'd ever forgive him. I snorted before I could stop myself. And what did you say? Nathan shrugged, but his tone was razor sharp. I said that forgiveness only makes sense when someone's truly sorry. And I don't think he is. I stared at my son. My once timid little boy had grown into someone who could cut through delusion like glass. Later that day, I got an email that made me blink twice. It was from Richard's employer, GTR Logistics. A woman named Marcia Fuller, the regional HR director, had sent a message titled Compliance Request, Divorce and Legal Documentation. Inside, she wrote, We confirm Mr. Richard Thompson has been transferred to the Rapid City, South Dakota branch as of October 1st, with a downgraded role to Tier 3 status. If you have any outstanding legal matters involving Mr. Thompson, please submit documentation to our legal team under labor compliance guidelines. It didn't take long to put the pieces together. Through a friend of mine, well, not a friend, more of a silent ally, a former coworker of Richard's who happened to love ash tree letters, I found out exactly what had happened. Jenna, the woman he'd built a secret family with, had made a call. She contacted GTR Logistics directly, trying to verify paperwork related to a potential relocation and sponsorship, assuming Richard would soon take her and Liam in as his legal dependents. The call was recorded. Internal red flags were raised. Company policy violations. Ethics reviews. A man who had built an image of dependability and discretion was now under investigation for using business trips to cover a double life. There was no formal firing. Richard was too careful for that. But the consequences were swift. Demotion. Transfer. Loss of corporate housing, performance bonuses, and access to high-tier clients. His name, once whispered as a candidate for senior management, was no longer mentioned at all. Rapid City was cold and quiet. A far cry from the bustling promise of Chicago. I heard Jenna couldn't adapt well. I didn't hear that from gossip. I read it in a private parenting group I quietly followed. She posted anonymously, "Any other moms dealing with a partner who promised stability but ends up pushing you to do all the emotional labor?" She never named Richard. But the comments were telling. You need a man, not a second child. Did he ever plan to marry you, or just hide you? One comment simply said, "Be careful. Men who lie to one family will lie to two." She didn't respond to that. Just deleted the thread a day later. Then came the envelope. Unmarked. Plain. No return address. Inside, a cashier's check for $85,000 and a single handwritten note that read, "Alimony. Don't contact me again." I stood in the doorway for a long time, just holding it. The man who once thought he'd outsmarted me, who expected me to quietly disappear, now had to pay to be forgotten. And I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either. I just felt clean. I used the money the only way that made sense, to honor someone who had truly seen me. Evelyn Thompson, Richard's mother. A woman who once whispered during Thanksgiving dinner, "If you ever leave him, you'll still be my daughter." I started a scholarship in her name. The Evelyn T. Fund for Girls, awarded to young women in North Carolina pursuing studies in literature, education, or law. The three things that had saved me from disappearing. I didn't tell Nathan at first. I waited until the official website went live. When I showed it to him, he didn't say much. Just wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "She'd be proud." As for Jenna? I heard she had started selling handmade crafts online. Sometimes she live-streamed, trying to keep up with the demand. But occasionally, she'd vent about deadbeat dads, about men who say they'll protect you then leave you with the rent. One viewer commented, "Maybe don't build a life on someone else's broken promises." She blocked them immediately. I had no judgment. Jenna had made her choices. I had made mine. And Richard? Well, he faded into the background. That's what happens when your mask falls and there's no one left willing to help you pick it up. Nathan, now 17, was preparing college applications. One night, while reading a draft of my second novel, he looked up and said, "Mom, you know what Dad told me once? He said you're dangerous because you stay quiet and still leave people with no way out." I blinked. Then smiled, slowly. "If that's what he thinks," I said, "then there's no reason to correct him. Because the truth is, I never raised my voice. I just raised the stakes." The first snow came early that year. A thin, quiet dusting, barely enough to coat the pine needles, but enough to hush the world just a little. I stood on the porch that morning, coffee in hand, watching the steam curl into the cold air. Nathan had already left for school, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the tightness in my chest I used to mistake for love. I was free. I wasn't waiting for a car to pull up in the driveway. I wasn't bracing for another cold smile, another meaningless gift from an absent man, or a rushed excuse about flights, clients, or his so-called duty. This time, the silence felt like peace, not punishment. I'd spent the past 2 months finalizing the last bits of paperwork. The divorce was official. The deed, protected. My pen name, C.L. Monroe, was now registered with the Library of Congress. I had a literary agent, an entertainment lawyer, and a quiet corner of the world where I could write without apology. It wasn't wealth in the traditional sense. But it was independence. It was strength. Then came the call I never expected. Hello? Is this Mrs. Thompson? Or should I say Ms. Monroe? The voice was female. Warm, professional. This is she, I said cautiously. I'm calling from Sunrise Studios in Tokyo. We're working in partnership with Harper Literary on the Ash Tree Letters adaptation. We'd love for you to consult on some character development for the anime. My heart skipped. Yes. Of course. I'd be honored. They offered to fly me out. But I declined. I wasn't ready for the world to see my face. Not yet. I wasn't hiding anymore, but I was choosing privacy, on my terms. We did the meetings online. Quietly. Carefully. With every episode they developed, they sent me the animation boards. The main character, Elara, looked nothing like me, yet somehow mirrored everything I had become. A quiet mother, underestimated, who used intelligence instead of rage to rebuild her world. I knew Elara would speak to people. Because she spoke for me. Then, just 2 weeks after the adaptation announcement, I got an email with the subject line. You're trending in Japan. Fan pages were popping up. Message boards full of young women guessing who C.L. Monroe really was. Some thought I was a retired teacher. Others believed I was a widow riding through grief. No one guessed the truth. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Until Nathan came home one Friday with a story that cracked me wide open. He was quiet over dinner. Pushing his food around. Then, out of nowhere, he said, I think Dad tried to talk to one of my teachers. I looked up. What? He emailed the school counselor. I guess he wanted to check in on my college progress. She said it didn't sit right with her. That it sounded like he was trying to insert himself for show. I set my fork down. Why now? I think he found out about your deal, Nathan said. The anime. Maybe the scholarship. He asked if I'd be willing to rebuild some kind of connection before graduation. I stared at my son. So clear-eyed. So young, but already carrying wisdom that took me decades to learn. What did you tell her? Nathan shrugged. I told her I have one parent. And she's sitting at home writing stories that heal people. I felt the tears sting before I could stop them. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. From being seen. From being believed. From the quiet, radiant power of being loved without condition. Later that night, I opened the old memory box Richard once gave me on our 10th anniversary. It was still tucked in the back of my closet, untouched for years. Inside were photos, notes, and a small USB drive I had forgotten existed. Out of curiosity, I plugged it in. Dozens of folders. Most empty. But one was labeled Home Video, Nathan First Steps. I clicked it. There he was, tiny, wobbly, taking his first steps across the living room floor. I was behind the camera. My voice was laughing, shaky, proud. And Richard? He wasn't in the frame. Because he hadn't been home. I closed the file and gently removed the USB, placing it back into the box. Some people try to rewrite history. But I had the receipts. All of them. A week later, a certified letter arrived. Not from Richard this time, but from his lawyer. It was a vague but probing inquiry into my recent intellectual property gains and whether any revenue from ash tree letters could be considered joint marital property due to the overlap in dates before the divorce. I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I forwarded the letter to my attorney, an unshakable woman named Renee who had once worked on publishing contracts for major memoirists. She replied to his lawyer with 3 sentences. All revenue and associated intellectual rights to ash tree letters fall under Ms. Thompson's sole ownership, as substantiated by timestamps, platform registrations, tax forms, and identity protections filed before the legal separation. Any further inquiry will be considered harassment. 3 days later, the inquiry was withdrawn. Richard never reached out again. Maybe he knew I'd built a fortress. Not of walls, but of facts, documents, resilience, and quiet power. Still, the most powerful moment came not from a lawyer, or a check, or even an anime. It came one night as Nathan stood on the porch, watching the sky turn dark with storm clouds. He turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think you stayed quiet because you were weak. Now I realize you were just listening. Learning." I looked at him and smiled. And preparing. The storm Nathan and I watched that night rolled in fast. Thunder cracked against the ridgeline, rain streaked down the windows, and the power flickered just long enough to make us light candles. We didn't talk much, just sat in the living room, he with his sketchbook, me with my laptop, both of us surrounded by the sound of something ending and beginning at the same time. That's what my life had become, a slow burn of endings disguised as beginnings. Or maybe it was the other way around. I opened a blank document. A new novel. Not a sequel. Not part of Ash Tree Letters. Something fresh. A woman in her late 30s, living in a mountain town, betrayed, yes, but not ruined. A mother. A creator. A woman who didn't burn down her world when she was hurt, but who rebuilt it, brick by quiet brick. I didn't know what to name her yet. I wasn't even sure I'd publish this one. Maybe it was just for me. Or maybe I still needed the armor of a pseudonym. 2 days later, a message hit my inbox from someone I never expected to hear from again, Jenna Malone. The subject line was, "You won. I hope it was worth it." At first, I almost deleted it without opening. But then curiosity got the better of me. "Becky, I know you probably don't care what I have to say. And honestly, I don't blame you. But Richard's not who he was with you anymore. He's miserable. Cold. He barely looks at Liam, and when he does, it's like the kid is a reminder of something he didn't finish. I thought I was getting a man who'd finally choose me. Instead, I got the version of him you left behind. He talks about you more than he talks to me. He says you outsmarted him. That you turned being quiet into a weapon. I don't want anything from you. But I hope, whatever you took from him, I hope it was worth what it cost the rest of us. Jenna." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I felt pity, but because of the strange irony. She thought I took something from her. As if Richard's failure to keep his second lie alive was somehow my fault. As if I had stolen what she deserved. I closed the laptop without replying. Some things don't need answers. Some wounds can't be stitched, only carried by the person who inflicted them. That weekend, Nathan and I drove up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. Just us. We hiked a trail I used to love when I was young, back before marriage, before motherhood, before forgetting who I was. At the overlook, he pulled out his phone and asked to take a picture. The mountains behind us were bathed in orange and gold. He wrapped one arm around my shoulder and said, "This is the one I'll frame. For college." I turned to him, surprised. "You've picked?" "University of North Carolina. Full ride. Journalism and digital media." I felt my chest swell. "You didn't tell me." I wanted to be sure. And I wanted you to be proud first. I always have been. He smiled, then added, you know. Dad called again last week. I stiffened. He asked if we could meet up over winter break. Just to talk. Said he wanted to apologize. And what did you say? Nathan paused. I said if he wants to apologize, he can start by writing it down. So it can't disappear like his promises did. I laughed, startled by how true that rang. That's very Monroe of you. He chuckled. What can I say? The apple didn't fall far. After the hike, we stopped for ice cream in a tiny town square cafe. As we sat on the bench, watching the leaves fall in lazy spirals, Nathan said something I'll never forget. You know what I used to think, when I was younger? That if someone leaves you, it means something's wrong with you. I looked at him. And now? Now I know, sometimes people leave because they can't handle what's right with you. What's steady? What's honest? They look at you and feel exposed. I nodded, fighting the lump in my throat. That night, when we returned home, a final envelope was waiting in the mailbox. It wasn't from Richard. Not officially. But it had his handwriting on the front, that same sharp-angled cursive I once traced with my finger in the first love letter he ever wrote me. Inside was a photo. The three of us, Emmy, Nathan, and Richard, standing in front of our old house on Thanksgiving, years ago. Nathan had been 6. His smile toothy. My hand on his shoulder. Richard's hand barely grazing mine. On the back, he had written, if I could do it again, I wish I'd been different. No return address. No signature. I placed the photo in a drawer, not to remember, but to never repeat. The past is a lesson, not a home. And I was done letting anyone else write my story. There was a strange comfort in knowing that Richard could no longer reach me, not in the way he used to. His influence, his charm, his manipulation, it all used to seep in through the cracks I didn't know I had. But now? There were no cracks left. Just solid stone, rebuilt by time, truth, and quiet defiance. After that envelope arrived, I didn't say anything to Nathan. There was no need. I tucked the photo into a file marked Old Life and slid it into the bottom drawer of the cabinet next to my writing desk. I had bigger things to focus on. The anime adaptation of Ash Tree Letters premiered on a Tuesday night. I didn't host a watch party. I didn't do any press. I just made popcorn, sat in my living room with a warm blanket, and watched alone. The opening scene was nearly identical to what I'd written, the woman, alone in her kitchen, pouring tea as her husband's suitcase sat untouched in the hallway. That small detail, the suitcase, it undid me. Not because it reminded me of Richard. But because it reminded me of myself. All those years, watching his luggage arrive and leave, never knowing that I was holding a family together while he built another one somewhere else. Ilara, the main character, looked nothing like me. But her silence was mine. Her anger, carefully stored like a knife hidden behind a bookshelf, was also mine. And when the screen faded to black and the title appeared, written by C.L. Monroe, my name, my real name, flashed in my mind. Becky. Not just someone's wife. Not just a mother. But a creator. A survivor. An author. That night, I didn't cry. I just wrote. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Fan letters. Messages from women saying they saw themselves in Ilara. One woman wrote, I thought I was crazy for staying so long. But your story helped me realize I wasn't crazy. I was just waiting for the right moment to leave. Another said, I used to think that being quiet meant being weak. But your character showed me that silence is sometimes where the real power lives. And then came the message that stopped me cold. From a name I didn't recognize at first, Danielle Ashford. Subject, you don't know me, but I know your story. Becky. I'm an assistant editor at Riverline magazine. I've been following your novel since it first went live on that old forum under the name Wildflower Witch. I knew, even back then, that the person writing those chapters had lived something. Your prose doesn't feel made up. It bleeds with truth. We're doing a feature next month titled Women Who Walked Away and Built Empires. I'd like to include your story. Not C.L. Monroe. But Becky. The woman who made it through betrayal, rebuilt her life, and raised a young man with a heart as big as his mother's strength. No pressure. But if you're willing, I'd be honored to tell your real story. I sat with that email open for hours. For years, I had protected my identity like it was fragile. As if the world knowing who I really was would somehow take away the power I had earned in secret. But maybe, it was time. That evening, I told Nathan. He blinked. So, you're going to tell them everything? Maybe not everything, I said. But enough to remind the world that we don't have to stay hidden just to stay safe. He nodded slowly. You're ready. I think I am. Then do it, he said. Because if there's one thing you've taught me, it's that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up. I accepted the interview. It ran 2 weeks later under the title, Becky Thompson, the woman who refused to disappear. I didn't tell Richard. I didn't need to. Because the story wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. It was about the choices we make when the world tries to erase us. It was about the grace we find not in revenge, but in rebuilding. And it was about showing my son that his mother didn't just survive. She rose. And for once, I didn't use a pen name. The morning after the Riverline magazine feature went live, I woke up to over 100 unread messages. Some from readers. Some from local women's groups. Some from old classmates I hadn't heard from in 20 years. And one, from my high school English teacher, Ms. Green. She had written, Becky, I always knew you had a voice the world needed to hear. You just needed the right silence to sharpen it. I closed my laptop and exhaled. I wasn't hiding anymore. And strangely, the moment I stopped trying to protect myself from the world, it embraced me. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail with a return address I recognized instantly, Rapid City, South Dakota. It was from Richard. Not a court document, not a check. Just a letter. Inside, folded carefully, were 2 things, a photograph of Liam, his son, with a note that simply read. He's struggling. With school. With me. With everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right. I was trying to replace something I never understood to begin with. There was no apology. Not really. But that wasn't what I needed anymore. I placed the letter next to the others in the drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a record. A breadcrumb of someone else's truth. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because every day I woke up in my little Asheville apartment, every word I typed, every class Nathan aced, every dollar earned from a story the world once told me wasn't worth telling, that was my answer. Nathan came home for fall break just after his first midterms. Taller. Stronger. More like a man than the boy I used to tuck into bed with a song and a soft night light. We went to a little brunch spot off the Arts District, and he slid a small envelope across the table. What's this? A surprise, he said. I opened it and saw a certificate inside. Nathan Thompson. Department of Digital Media. First-year Creative Writing Award winner. The house that stayed. I smiled. You wrote about the house? He nodded. It's not really about the building, though. It's about you. And about staying, even when someone else tried to push you out. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. You really are your mother's son. He grinned. And proud of it. That night, while he sat curled up on the couch sketching thumbnails for a short film, I opened my laptop. I had just signed a second book deal. A new story. One that didn't begin with betrayal, but with boldness. With a woman who wasn't trying to recover, but trying to rise higher than ever before. My agent told me I could use my real name if I wanted. I typed, by Rebecca Thompson, and stared at it for a long time. Not Becky. Not C.L. Monroe. But all of me. 1 year after Richard left for good, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment for a local women's circle. We read passages from each other's books. We shared stories of heartbreak, healing, and hard-won triumphs. At the end, one woman stood and asked, if you could give your old self one piece of advice, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. Don't confuse patience with silence. And don't mistake sacrifice for duty. You're allowed to take up space, even if someone else once told you to shrink. There was a long silence after that. Not awkward, just full. Heavy with truth. Before everyone left, one woman pulled me aside and whispered, I left him. After 23 years. Your story gave me permission. I hugged her. Not because I was strong. But because I understood. The journey from shadow to sunlight isn't loud. It's steady. Sometimes invisible. But always real. Months later, the Ash Tree Letters anime won a storytelling award in Tokyo. I didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, I watched it on my laptop while making tea. When they called the winner's name, a translator spoke. For crafting a tale of stillness, strength, and the subtle courage it takes to walk away. I turned off the screen and looked out the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass. I used to hate rainy days. They made me feel stuck. Trapped. Now, they felt like music. Nathan's voice called from the other room, Mom, can I borrow your charger? I smiled. Top drawer, left side. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. No drama. No threats. No need to prove anything. Just the sound of my son's voice, the words on my screen, and the peace that comes when you've finally written yourself into your own story. I didn't win a battle. I reclaimed a life. Some things don't break with impact, they fall apart from years of being quietly ignored. But when they do, you have a choice, fade into the silence, or become the author of your own recovery. Becky didn't scream. She didn't beg. She listened, learned, and rose. Quietly. Completely. And now, she doesn't just survive, she creates, she leads, and she inspires. If her story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories of justice, transformation, and the unbreakable strength of women who refuse to be erased.